Thank you very much, Edna, for your kind introduction. And hello, everyone from Singapore. In my presentation titled Dense and Green Cities, Architecture's Urban Ecosystem, I will present to you innovative building projects in high-density urban environments that show that density and sustainability are not necessarily contradictory. In fact, they can be mutually dependent and synergistic. So in the following, I will introduce to you an ongoing research project at the Singapore ETH Center Future Cities Laboratory and the Singapore University of Technology and Design. I will present to you a number of exemplary projects in Singapore to illustrate the interaction between buildings and the city as ecological systems and the many environmental, social, and economic benefits the resulting dense and green city offers. I will also mention how these projects support higher standards of environmental sustainability, as well as enhanced urban resilience and livability. In the slide, you see the Singapore ETH Center Future Cities Laboratory at the Campus for Research Excellence and Technological Enterprise in Singapore, where a lot of the research that I will be referring to in the presentation has been conducted. The Future Cities Laboratory was established by ETH Zurich and the National Research Foundation Singapore in collaboration with key academic partners, including the Singapore University of Technology and Design in 2010, to study sustainable future cities through science, by design, and in place. FCL's agenda is the development of new integrated planning paradigms, research methodologies, and implementation processes to support higher population densities, higher standards of environmental sustainability, and enhanced livability. In this context, Dense and Green Cities explores innovative building projects in high-density urban contexts that include public and common spaces, extensive sky terraces, often in combination with sky bridges and vertical parks, roof gardens, and other green components. So combinations of these often apply to mixes of residential, civic, and commercial programs, conjoin at times to produce vertical cities in which the building section becomes what the horizontal plane has entailed up to now. Density and sustainability here are not seen as contradictory, but rather as mutually dependent and synergistic. So over the past 5 years, we have been studying a large number of such projects with a focus on Singapore. On this slide, you see some of the publications that are related to the research I am referring to. On the left, quite a recent issue of Architecture and Urbanism, titled Singapore Capital City for Vertical Green. So for quite some time now, Singapore has been a leader in dense and green cities in Southeast Asia. As the city-state's population continues to grow and with limited land available, developing a compact city with extensive greenery and highly livable environments continues to be an important strategy. Singapore offers a wealth of developments for our research. The information at hand and knowledge gleaned from these can enable similar ideas to be applied in other cities. This helps to improve urban environments there as well, steering the dense and green agenda from its current status to an integrated and tacit element of the planning and design of future sustainable cities in general. On the left, I already mentioned the Architecture and Urbanism publication that came out actually in 2012. Which features contributions by many of the stakeholders in Singapore's dense and green planning paradigm, including government agencies, developers, and architects. Next to the A+U cover, you see 2 book publications that summarize important findings of our research. In the middle, you see the cover of Dense and Green, Innovative Building Types for Sustainable Urban Architecture from 2016. Actually, this book shows Jean Nouvel's One Central Park in Sydney, Australia on the cover, which is a case study that, of course, is not located in Singapore, but is one of our international case studies. On the right, you see Dense and Green Cities, Architecture's Urban Ecosystem from 2020, which is our latest book publication that summarizes important results of our work. On the next slide, you see a colored engraving from the 19th century that shows the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. So of course, the idea of integrating architecture and landscape architecture is not a new one, but in fact dates back thousands of years. So if we fast forward from this image to the year 2000, this is an example of MVRDV, the Dutch pavilion that was built for the Expo 2000 in Hanover in Germany. You see quite clearly how the architects express and experiment with a typology in which architecture and landscape architecture are fused in a very interesting and innovative way. If we look at the context of Singapore, here's an example, not a build example, but a rendering by WOHA, which is one of the leading offices when it comes to dense and green developments in architecture here in Singapore. This is a rendering called Permeable Lattice City of the Future. It was done in 2011. And in a way, it foresees a future in which, again, density, greenery, sustainability, and resilience of a city are not mutually exclusive. So this is a hypothetical project, but if we look at actual build work, here's an example from 2015, OMA, Bureau Ole Scherens, RSP, Architects, Planners, and Engineers project called The Interlace. This is a fairly large residential development in the heart of Singapore. Just to give you an idea of the size of it, it has about 1,000 residential units and a gross floor area of 170,000 square meters. So this is quite a typical development that we see nowadays in Singapore. And it houses roughly 3,500 people. So in the section, in the exploded isometric on the left, you see very nicely how architecture and landscape architecture, green and gray spaces are integrated on multiple levels, and how the building explicitly makes reference to the adjacent green space of Singapore. This can also be nicely seen in the aerial view of the project. So again, you have elevated sky gardens, you have roof gardens. The lower level is in fact not the ground level that you see in this image. It is already a raised level, the so-called eco deck, where all the pedestrian traffic takes place, and that includes, next to green features, also many, many blue features. Behind a lot of these developments are government incentives and regulations that essentially push the development of such projects. And I want to highlight here just one, which is the Landscaping for Urban Spaces and High-Rises, or LUSH program that was developed by the Singapore government. It is a comprehensive urban and skyrise greening program comprising both landscape replacement area requirements and incentives to provide greenery and communal spaces in high density projects. It was introduced in 2009 as a consolidated urban and skyrise greenery scheme comprising incentives and requirements. So LUSH capitalizes on development as a means to inject more greenery into the city. The premise is quite simple. Replace the greenery which has been taken away as a building is developed or redeveloped. Since its introduction, LUSH has been updated multiple times and is currently in its version 3.0. On the next slide, you see another residential development that I think is quite typical for an implementation of the LUSH program. This is public housing in the north of Singapore. This is Group Asia's and AEDA's Punggol Waterway Terraces project from 2015. So again, a large-scale residential development. Again, more than 1,000 units are housed in this project. Again, you see the integration of green spaces and blue systems on multiple levels of the project. And in this case, the gross floor area is about 146,000 square meters. Again, a very, very large residential project. On this slide, you see a detail of this project. Again, we're not on ground level, we are on an elevated level, and we're looking from above at one of the large courtyards, the so-called jungle courtyards. So again, you see a very nice integration of architecture and landscape architecture in a project like this. A more recent project that I think makes also the lush approach very clear is Woha's Kampung Admiralty from 2016. It is designed again by Woha and was awarded the World Architecture Festival Building Award in 2018. The project is Singapore's first integrated public development that brings together a mix of public facilities and services under one roof. Kampung Admiralty includes a large community plaza and features an extensive public roof garden on multiple levels and is widely seen as a model for future such developments in Singapore. Again, I'm sharing with you a detail of this project. So in this case, we're looking at the very large landscape architecture on the roof of this building. So in our research, we have taken projects like the three that I just shared with you, and we studied a couple of dimensions. So first of all, we were interested in the regulating services that such projects offer. So regulating services refers to the effect of dense and green buildings upon the urban microclimate, their contributions to migrating urban heat islands, and stormwater management. The project that you see here is Woha's Oasia Hotel Downtown that was completed in 2016. The next dimension we were interested in are the socio-cultural services that dense and green buildings offer. This refers to the contribution of dense and green buildings to human psychological well-being and culture. Dense and green buildings increase the amenity value and attractiveness of the urban landscape and offer recreational potential. By providing places where people can meet, rest, and play, the green spaces foster social and cultural integration. So the project that you see here is the aforementioned Punggol Waterway terraces. Another dimension we were interested in are the so-called supporting services. So this refers to services that are underlying all the other services and contribute to the overall resilience of the urban system. Key supporting services of dense and green buildings include their support of higher levels of biodiversity. And here you see a study of bird population in one of the projects that you see on the right, which is Skywell at Dawson, completed in 2015. Again, a Woha project, a very large residential project with multiple sky gardens and roof gardens. Last but not least, we were interested in economic services. So economic services refers to the contribution of dense and green buildings to land value appreciation. So in other words, what are clients willing to pay to inhabit a dense and green building as opposed to a conventional building? In terms of results, we can share with you that dense and green developments we found in our research provide important regulating services such as mitigating urban heat island effects. So dense and green buildings can offset solar radiation interception. For example, greenery implemented in the research case studies led to a decrease of surface temperatures in Singapore of up to 23.5 degrees Celsius. Second, dense and green developments provide important supporting services, such as the increase of urban biodiversity and resilience. The dense and green developments that we studied provided important socio-cultural services, such as fostering social and cultural integration. Dense and green buildings clearly can contribute to human psychological well-being. They can increase the amenity value and attractiveness of urban landscapes and offer a lot of recreational potential. By providing places, again, where people can meet, rest, and play, they foster social and cultural integration. Also, dense and green developments are affordable in terms of construction and maintenance costs. The research found that construction and maintenance costs of dense and green buildings were variable, but generally fairly affordable. They contributed between 1.5 and 4.5% to the overall cost. And last but not least, dense and green developments can provide important economic services such as contributions to economic sustainability and land value appreciation. So in our research, we found that dense and green buildings are valued by property purchasers and add to the economic value of their urban context. I will close my short presentation with a photograph. Again, here you see a detail of Woha's Kampung Admiralty. In this case, we're looking at the roof garden again, which integrates a beautiful playground. So again, keep in mind, we're not on ground level, we're somewhere high up in the urban built environment. And this is a picture that I like very much because it includes many of the elements that we are interested in our research at the Future Cities Laboratory. So I hope that in my presentation, I was able to provide some evidence that urban density can be designed and it can be designed well. I believe that it can be the ultimate test of intelligent design and at its best, make our cities more beautiful, more livable, more sustainable, and more resilient. And with that, I will finish my presentation. Thank you very much.
And what a fascinating discussion there, what a fascinating presentation, really looking at what's going on, particularly in Singapore, but something I think we can relate to cities around the world. I'm absolutely delighted now to be joined by Professor Thomas Schroepfer. He's with us here at the moment. Thomas, thank you for taking the time. And I know our audience should have some interesting questions, maybe to make sure that we put to you. But something I want to start this off in our Q&A, if I may, when we look at, dense and green cities. I mean, many times I think, myself included, you might think it's dense versus green. You're actually saying, no, this is actually complementary. And I think you've definitely laid out how that can be, particularly in that. But talk to me a little bit more about this concept.
Yeah, thank you, Edna, for the excellent question. I think Singapore is a great case to study how density and sustainability, resilience of a city, how all of these things can actually be combined without sacrificing the livability aspect of the city as well. So in a way, in the context of Singapore, Singapore has no choice, right? Singapore is a city-state, so land is limited, it's incredibly expensive. So in a way, you have to find strategies to use the vertical dimension to grow the city, but at the same time, you want to increase the density and again, not sacrifice some of the other qualities that you want to see in a high density urban environment. So I think architects in Singapore have been incredibly innovative in finding ways to combining landscape architecture, open public and common spaces on elevated levels. And what we see is essentially the emergence of a truly vertical city where many of the functions that in a traditional city you would only find on the ground level are in fact folded into the building section. And that is why I shared some examples here with you today. There are many more examples. But I also want to highlight that this is not limited to Singapore. Singapore is just a great case. And I think the government has seen the value of such strategies and is therefore putting up a lot of incentives for developers and architects to experiment with such building types. But there are many other places in the world as well. And we have in fact conducted a number of control case studies in other places also.
And that's very much what I wanted to ask you. And indeed, a few questions coming in here to addressing that very topic. How transferable is this model? And also looking at existing cities, we don't want to demolish good buildings that are in place. But is there a possibility, and again, what would we be looking at in terms of the cost to retrofit, existing cities and buildings and to perhaps bring them into this newer design that, I mean, without a doubt, It certainly looks very creative. It looks very environmentally sound. It looks more sustainable. It looks very healthy. It's nice. It's easy on the eye as well. I mean, there's a lot going for it, but can we actually do this with existing cities?
Yeah, I think you can certainly adapt the existing building stock as it is done also in the Singapore context. So many rooftops are now becoming green roofs, or they're used for the installation of solar cells and things like that. So I think there are strategies to do this with the existing building stock as well. As for your question about how this can be transferred to other cities, I mentioned previously that we have studied a number of cases in other parts of the world as well. So in this context, I want to mention One Central Park, for example, is a beautiful example in Sydney in Australia by Atelier Jean Nouvel. Is a mixed-use development where you can see how this paradigm can play out also in a different climatic context, right? They use a very large heliostat that channels the light very deep into the building, down to levels where usually natural light would not reach. Another great example, I think, is the Bosco Berticale in Milan, another project that we have studied by Stefano Burri Architects, where literally the title is an expression of what the architects wanted to achieve, which is a vertical forest. And the ambition of the architects was to improve not just provide a nice environment for people to live in that building, but also to improve the whole urban context that this project sits in. So there were very careful considerations of the improvement of the air quality. Of course, biodiversity went up in this part of Milan, and there are many, many positive effects that buildings like this can have on the larger urban context that they sit in.
Now, of course, you mentioned a few very well-known architects there, but also, you know, these well-known architects come at a big price. So when we look at return of investment in terms of, you know, building any building like that, you know, surely they're very expensive to maintain. You know, so in that case, are they affordable to actually put? And what difference will it make if you have a wonderful building in the city? I mean, does it impact people around you?
So interestingly, what we found in the cases that we studied is that dense and green buildings are quite affordable. So the cases we looked at, the investment, it varied, but it was somewhere between 1.5 and 4.5 of the cost upfront, the building of the project itself. And the same range applied also to the maintenance of such buildings. So if you look at the equation, the return on investment, so the attractiveness of such projects and the rents that you can get out of them, usually exceeds what you put in as you know, to achieve such a building in the first place and to maintain it then in the longer run. So economically, we found in all the cases that we studied that it makes perfect sense. Interestingly, in the Singapore context, these strategies are not limited to high-end private residential developments, but these strategies are also applied in public housing. In fact, two of the projects that you saw in the presentation, Punggol Waterway Terraces and Kampung Admiralty, are both done by the Housing Development Board of Singapore. So just for you who are not, maybe some of the viewers are not familiar with the Singapore context, but in Singapore, roughly just under 90% of the population live in projects done by the Housing Development Board. So you see that this can be done in a way that is not too expensive. Often the detailing, the architectural detailing is simple. That's usually a quality because you do not want to have difficult technical systems because they tend to fail. So, you know, the simpler the detail and the easier it is to maintain, the better you will do in the long run with projects like this.
Now, we had earlier just had a chance to talk offline, and you were talking to about the concept of like the skyline in New York that I have yet to see. But again, how this, you know, has possibly, you know, helped the property value in the neighborhood, so to speak. Talk to me a little bit more about the value, because now it has become sort of a world must go see when you're putting the tourist spots in New York on your list.
That's right. So, I mean, in the case of the High Line, I think a lot of people know that the High Line itself, I mean, is an incredible place to go to. So it has kind of boosted the image of Manhattan as a whole, which is another interesting effect of such projects. But it's not just the fact that you have an interesting kind of green axis that runs from the downtown to the midtown of Manhattan now. But the real estate value around this project has also gone up, right? So that is an effect that we see quite often in the projects that we study, that often it is just the proximity to a dense and green building or development that has a kind of economic impact on the urban context that these things sit in. So there are examples here in Singapore where there's a hotel that we looked at quite closely, which is a 4-star hotel, but it is a dense and green building, and actually is so popular that it charges 5-star hotel prices. So again, it's sometimes it is also just the proximity to projects like this that then pushes the real estate value of regular developments around such projects.
Indeed. So would you say there's such a thing as good density and maybe not so good density when it comes to high-rise?
Absolutely. I think this is a particularly important point in the context of the current pandemic. So there was a lot of discussion around density. Is density actually a concept, urban density, a concept of the past? Now that we have seen that it can lead to a lot of negative effects, but I think density itself is not good or bad, but density can be designed in a good way and in a bad way. I would say that in Singapore, there are very good examples for how this can be done. And in fact, you look at the infection numbers during the pandemic in our context, they're quite low, right? And I think the fact that many projects here are in fact dense and green projects, and people have access to green spaces, and there's generally a lot of care in terms of ventilation and things like that as projects go up. I think you can take this as an example that good density can work even in a situation of a global pandemic.
Yes, indeed. No, it is very exciting, all the possibilities that are there. And before I let you go, I really want to talk to you about, I think, the role of the university. I mean, you're not just a theoretical group of people looking at this concept. I mean, are you working with the city? You're working with policymakers? You're working with, tell me who's involved to actually bring about some of the tremendous work that you're actually doing as an educational establishment.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So we work in all the things that we do. We work very closely with the government agencies, so Housing Development Board, the Urban Redevelopment Authority here in the context of Singapore. But of course, we also work quite closely with other stakeholders from practice, the architects, the planners, landscape architects. So I think our research in general is very close to what's actually happening. And in fact, the role that we play as researchers in this is sometimes that we also inform new policies, right, that the government comes up with, because we provide essentially a scientific understanding of what these things can do in various dimensions, economic, social, cultural, etc. So we had cases where we actually helped to draft new government policies for upcoming future developments.
And I've maybe 30 seconds left. This is all, it's not all about residential. You can actually transfer this design to non-residential, maybe even industry. What do you think?
Absolutely. There are many examples. I didn't show them in the presentation today, but there are many examples from infrastructure projects, institutions, schools, hospitals, you name it, right? So I think the dense and green paradigm is by no means limited to residential developments.
Well, super. It's certainly something that, the lovely thing about this Big Five Digital Festival is we can all go back and have a look and re-examine all of these sessions. So I'm definitely going to be having another listen to all of the great presentation you did there and really look at what's going on. But fascinating look into what Dense and Green is all about. And so we don't necessarily need to be going sort of out to the backyard anymore. We can be going up the building, so to speak. So it's very exciting, really. Thank you so much there from the Singapore University of Technology and Design, Professor Thomas Schroepfer. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Edna. Thank you for having me.
So very, very interesting there. Great way to start off our morning, looking up and looking around us in terms of the great possibilities that are out there when it comes to construction and it comes to building. We're going to continue this theme when we come back after the break and really be looking at now how digital cities can boost economic growth and tourism. Stay with the Big Five Festival. We'll be back shortly.